A lot of story threads were left hanging throughout Star Wars Legends over its lifetime. Some of these were stories left untouched because of the end of the old expanded universe's publishing with the reboot, but as a universe with hundreds of people contributing their own ideas, there were also plenty of other storylines floated around which just never got revisited. Sometimes the line between that is a bit blurry, but today I'm going to be focusing on 5 of the bigger storylines left unresolved for reasons other than the reboot, 2 of which could have had massive implications for the broader expanded universe. The first, and one of those 2 big ones, is whatever Silri the Night Sister was up to. The end of Empire at War Forces of Corruption saw Silri, a Night Sister and former captive of the Empire, who had cooperated with Tiber Zahn's criminal consortium, stealing some data related to the location of ancient Sith artifacts, and the final scene shows her discovery of an ancient tomb, lined with Sith soldiers in armor from Revan's era, frozen in carbonite. I've been able to talk to one of the developers at Petroglyph in the past and confirm that their personal hope, at least, was to take a potential sequel to the game or another expansion later into the timeline to around 30 ABY, and to have Silri lead a resurgent Sith faction equipped with mothballed ships from Revan's period. Timeline-wise in Legends, this would put them between the New Jedi Order and Dark Nest Crisis most likely, so it's not impossible to make this work, but it's actually one of 3 or 4 Sith factions hiding around the galaxy at that point, along with Krayt slowly forming one Sith, and the Lost Tribe of the Sith, who factor more into some of the other plot lines that got dropped by the reboot. And again, this would just be one of the devs' hopes rather than any official plan they were working off of. If the game had ever been greenlit for a sequel, I'm sure this would have evolved over time. But as it is, we never did get a follow-up showing what happened with Silri, or even where she found those soldiers. I did say it wouldn't be impossible to fit them in, but it would be hard. The New Jedi Order had already come out by the time Forces of Corruption did, and they had the galaxy pretty overrun between 25 and 29 ABY, and the Dark Nest Crisis had already released set between 35 and 36 ABY, with a lot of characters having some major strokes of their prior 5 years locked in, especially Jason being absent. But you could probably have Luke and the New Jedi Order dealing with a small resurgent Sith threat, while the galaxy is vulnerable, with Jason returning for a few months as a special treat, or probably more feasibly slotted in after Dark Nest and before Legacy of the Force. But in either situation, the game would have a lot of built-up lore from the period to deal with, or more likely just ignore. Our second drop plotline is something which was more hinted at as a possibility than a fully established plotline before it got dropped: the clone of Grand Admiral Thrawn. In the Hand of Thrawn duology, Luke and Mara go to the planet Nirawan, 10 years after Thrawn's death, and find the base of Thrawn's Empire of the Hand, a faction he had set up in the Unknown regions consisting of resources filtered in from the Chiss Ascendancy and the Galactic Empire, along with the cooperation of other species from the Unknown regions. Thrawn had promised them he would return 10 years later if they ever heard of his death, which turned out to be because he had a clone growing at the bottom of his fortress thanks to cloning technology he had found in Mount Tantus during the Thrawn trilogy, with the clone being updated with flash learning about Thrawn's life, preparing it to basically be a one-to-one replacement. Unfortunately for that clone, Luke and Mara flooded the basement, killing it. But in the follow-up novel, Survivor's Quest, Mara and Luke speculate again about whether there may have been another Thrawn clone waiting in the wings somewhere. This possibility was never directly explored, but it seems like author Timothy Zahn's answer to the question was going to be that yes, there was another Thrawn out there. He was on record about wanting to do a story about Luke and Mara's son Ben teaming up with the clone Thrawn to solve some kind of problem. This story was never developed into an actual book, but the idea was at least out there in public from his own mouth, with some in-universe musings about the possibility, so I think it warrants inclusion here. Our third hanging thread involves a character with an indeterminate fate from a video game like the first topic, and a topic the author wasn't able to revisit like the second one. That is the fate of RC-1207, aka Sev. If you played the 2005 video game Republic Commando, you'd know the squad goes to Kashyyyk towards the end of the war and violates the classic D&D rule of never splitting the party, resulting in one of the 4 commandos, Sev, being lost in the woods. Karen Travis's Republic Commando and Imperial Commando books touch on the fate of Delta Squad after this mission, giving them a new, temporary, according to squadmate Scorch, replacement for the missing psychopath, and a couple attempts to find Sev were either offered or executed to no avail. Travis did want to do more with Sev, however she wasn't allowed to. The fate of Sev was off-limits to her since there were some plans to cover his fate in Republic Commando sequel. One of Republic Commando's lead engineers, Brett Duville, later explained there were 2 possible storylines for Republic Commando 2, one of which involves Sev as one of the many people who turned out to have started the rebellion. Ultimately, LucasArts started being a bit of a tire fire after around 2008ish, which is why a lot of the topics in this video are about video games not being followed up on. And unfortunately, Sev, and our fourth topic, who also coincidentally started the rebellion, fell victim to that. That topic is, as you may be able to guess, the fate of Starkiller. Starkiller was made about as important as a video game protagonist could be to the galaxy. For one thing, Galen Marek helped found the rebellion. While Galen Marek himself died, allegedly, but that's a different subject, or I guess another hanging plot thread, his clone joins the rebellion in his place and manages to survive the game, along with the other major protagonists, including Ramkota. They were fairly well known within the rebellion, and while their being absent in other stories would be notable given their prominence, it wouldn't be all that weird considering how many other characters just disappear into the background. But we do know for a fact that there were at least some plans for a sequel which never got off the ground, involving a situation where Starkiller and Vader get shot down together and similarly can't get off the ground. Though much like in the Silri and Sev situation, this is entirely based on developer speculation, which never made it into any kind of official development. Our fifth and final drop thread for the day is the second of the major universe-altering plots I teased at the start like a real YouTuber, though it's technically less of a dropped one than one which significantly morphed while being repurposed, the Dark Horse invasion storyline. You may be thinking, but hey, they made the New Jedi Order series, and you'd technically be right, but it's not the same thing. Dark Horse, who were responsible for the comic books, had been planning their own invasion storyline before Del Rey jumped in with it, pulling Nomenor, who had been introduced by Dark Horse in the Crimson Empire comics, in as one of the Yuuzhan Vong's first agents in the galaxy about 10 years before the full invasion, instead of whatever Dark Horse were planning to do with him. The only similarities between NJO and the Dark Horse storyline seemed to be that there was an invasion, and Nomenor would be related to whatever they were doing. It was apparently so divergent that Randy Stradley, then senior editor at Dark Horse for Star Wars comics and co-author of the Crimson Empire comics in question, took to Dark Horse's forums in 2003, before the NJO was even finished publishing, saying that it had soured Dark Horse on Star Wars, and, quote, "Personally, it's difficult for me to look objectively at any of the NJO stuff, because I only see how wrong it is, in comparison to what we had planned. I'm a big New Jedi Order fan, but I do understand where he's coming from, and the rest of the post goes into much less salacious detail about the difficulties in transmedia storytelling, with so many different people involved, a topic which I also kind of touched on with the Silri section. Really though, the idea of some kind of major threat invading the galaxy wasn't something Dark Horse could even claim came from them first. The meeting which led to the New Jedi Order series, which did involve Stradley representing Dark Horse, didn't happen until after Nomenor's introduction, but the Hand of Thrawn duology was coming out from the book side a few months before even that, and Timothy Zahn was already dropping hints at a major threat out there. He's indicated that he never meant the Yuuzhan Vong and instead meant the Grisk the whole time, like in the newer Thrawn books, or someone like them. But whatever his intention, it seems like everyone was kind of coming to the idea of having a big threat come from either the unknown reaches of the galaxy or from beyond the galaxy at the same time. Kind of like how Star Wars just ended up having a bunch of zombie-esque stories come out at a time when people just liked zombie stories. It just so happens that this would have been a much bigger deal, so only one person really got to do it. About half a decade after the conclusion of the New Jedi Order books, it does seem like Randy and the Dark Horse people came around a bit more, leading to the 2009 publication of the Invasion comic set within the Yuuzhan Vong War. Though it does mean we'll still never know what exactly they had planned for their invasion of the Star Wars galaxy. That's the end for this round of dropped storylines. I'll at least be doing an edition focusing on storylines cut by the end of the universe, provided our own universe doesn't end before then, but there's probably also enough out there for another set of these. If there's another storyline I didn't talk about today which you particularly wanted to hear about, or even if it is one of the ones I talked about today, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.